Hello everybody and welcome again to Frontierland with me, Dean Allen. I'm really excited about tonight's show. As you probably know, I've moved to Port Elizabeth last year and I've fallen in love with this wonderful city. So in the episodes of Frontierland, we've looked all around the wonderful Eastern Cape, further afield in South Africa, but tonight we're going to bring it back to here in Port Elizabeth. We're actually going to go right to the centre of Port Elizabeth and this incredible historic region that we've got. And I've got two people who are passionate about this city, more passionate than me. They've lived here all of their lives and we're going to bring them in. But we talk about someone who's proud of Port Elizabeth, no one more so than Mr. Adrian Gardner, of course, the creator of Shamwari Game Reserve. He now has the wonderful Founders Game Reserve, as well as the new Neosi Game Reserve on the edge of Port Elizabeth. And I'd just like to wish Adrian a happy 80th birthday. Quite incredible that man who's still going strong, he's got a work ethic that beats us all, is 80, and he said last night at his birthday party, I've still got so much to do. So happy birthday, Adrian, and thank you for everything you do for not only the Eastern Cape but also South Africa. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges we have in South Africa, but also some of the positive stories we've got, especially here in Port Elizabeth. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the show. Now it's your time to shine. We're gonna have a lekker chat tonight. Another good time.
Well, I'm delighted to have not just one but two guests tonight, and I just thank you so much for coming into the studio, Lauren Nash and Jurie Kotze. Why are you here? We're talking about Port Elizabeth tonight. We're talking about a place that we're passionate about. We're here now in the centre of Port Elizabeth, but we're going to talk about Central, which is a district that you both have strong connections with. Lauren, what does it mean to you, Port Elizabeth? You're a Port Elizabeth girl or Eastern Cape anyway?
Yeah, from the Eastern Cape. Central she's a beautiful old lady. Walking the streets, you see the magnificent sea views. It really is old buildings. It's a beautiful place. It's the heartbeat of the city. It's got the most history, oldest buildings, and not a lot of people live and work there. So I think it's a great place.
Which you do. We'll talk about a little bit about that. You're invested in Central. You work there. When I first moved here, of course, Jurie, it was one of those places that I just thought, my goodness. I came from Cape Town. We all know about Cape Town and its history, but Port Elizabeth is one of those understated places. And as soon as you drive past that city centre and you look and you see those magnificent buildings, I knew as a historian that this was a special place. But if you look closer, of course, you can see that the glory days, perhaps, some of its finery is gone. And then I dug a little bit deeper and I realised that we have some challenges here that you guys are invested in. But what's your involvement with Central and why are you so interested in it?
Dean, some of the involvement came by default. I found myself at the wrong place at the right time, I guess. But I've owned some property in the past in Central, and same things, I guess, that attract you is the great architecture, the importance that it plays in the city as a whole. We can almost not afford to lose that part of the city to decay. So I almost felt like a slight moral obligation to get involved because we can't have it lost. It's just there's too much there to have it lost, and it's not impossible to save it. So it seemed like something that we can do. It seems like something within our grasp, even with the challenges that we face, and I think the city will be much better off if we can improve it for many reasons.
I think this is probably one of the most important discussions I've had on Frontierland, because not only is this city somewhere I've invested in my family, but it almost mirrors the challenges we have here in Quebec or Port Elizabeth. It mirrors the challenges we've got in wider South Africa. How much do we hold on to our past and how much do we go forward? But there's always this idea in our urban areas. I've lived in Cape Town, I've travelled Durban, of course Johannesburg, that people have moved out of the city centre into the outlying areas. Perhaps Cape Town, am I right, is the only city perhaps that has a functioning centre that is relatively safe. It's certainly functioning in terms of tourism and it's one of its features. But I know, and you know, and I hope everybody who doesn't know, Port Elizabeth has everything that Cape Town's got in terms of that infrastructure and that heritage within its centre. It's a case of now reclaiming it and starting to also tonight highlight what's happening there. I mean, Lauren, you've run a business now for how long there, and what are your experiences?
Well, 78's been there for 3 years now, so there was nothing before. So it was a new addition to the building to Havelock Street. I've had personally no negative experiences. Yes, there has been one or two petty crime things that have happened to customers who maybe parked outside, but it's not something that is enough for me to say I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. It's incredibly essential. There's customers and people that work in the building and around the buildings around you, and it's so essential, close to warmer, close to everywhere, so you can quickly get in. So it's, yeah.
I know you're passionate about it, and I know when we had that discussion, I mean, the people there are quite special, and we'll talk about the history and how it's developed a little bit more. But the thing that recently I should say is, and I would encourage anyone to do this, was I took a tour. And we'll talk about the SRA, the Central Special Rates Association, that encourage people to take a tour of Central, because a lot of people, even here in Port Elizabeth, they believe that it's unsafe. It's an area now, no-go zone as such, and you couldn't be more wrong, because when I went there, I felt safe, but it unlocked so many of the mysteries for me. It's quite a magnificent area. But of course it has its challenges, Jurie, and we were talking earlier about how the place has evolved. Can you just give us some idea of sort of Central, what it looked like, say, 30 years ago, and how that evolution has happened?
Do you know what? Well, I think one of the major contributors to the change of Central was the university moving. So UPE moved out of Central, and I think Central struggled to find an economic reason for its existence from then to now, and it's had a slow, I don't want to use the word decay, but it has had a slow decay because of it. We've got a lot of people staying in Central that are staying there for a short time. They come for a year or two as students or as working people. They go, I'm going to live in Central, I'm not from Port Elizabeth, there's lots of accommodation, I'm going to live here for a year or two and move on. So what we're seeing less of, the one thing we chatted about is the old man or old lady in a block of flats that make sure that the gate motor is working, that make sure that the rubbish is taken out on the right day, etc., etc. So it's almost become a place where people pass and stop and go. They're not there for a long time. That's not necessarily a problem. Many places are like that. I think the suburb and the owners of the properties might have struggled to adapt to that, because you need to change the way you do things if you are an area where you don't have that memory. It's almost like there's no institutional memory in Central. Every year we had a meeting this week with the municipality about all the new students arriving. We need to tell all of them again that you can't do certain things on certain days, etc., etc. That has to happen every year. So once we know those things, we can control that change and turn it into something positive. It doesn't have to be something bad. It's not necessarily something bad. If it's not managed and understood, it can be something bad.
And what is your role with the SRA? Just explain that particular organisation, because they're doing some incredible work at the moment.
I'll just explain what the SRA is in short. So Anthony Adler was one of the guys that spearheaded it. It's a civic organisation which the municipality endorses. We mentioned Cape Town earlier, and you'd be surprised how many of Cape Town's areas have SRAs. There are many SRAs in the Western Cape. It's a way for the public to take control of smaller things or whatever they want to do. On your municipal account, a certain percentage is added on. So the municipality becomes the collector of the money, and they pay that to the SRA. So we've got funds every landowner in Central contributes to that, and we've got certain funds that we spend in certain ways. So my personal contribution is, I'm always reluctant to say this because I'm in charge of the waste portfolio, so I'm in charge of waste. That's quite a tough portfolio, I must admit. So that's what I do. I generally work with the waste management, some involvement in the parks and so on. So, but the biggest thing is working with the municipality, with the MBDA, and a lot of time is spent educating the people of Central, and with that I mean people coming and going, staying for short periods of time. So normally you would ask your neighbour what day is rubbish day, but if he also arrived in January, he doesn't know either. So we spend a lot of time explaining how it should work in Central.
So we've lost that community fabric, as you said, the body corporate, and there's a lot of residential buildings there, of course, but if it's a transitional place where perhaps people rent predominantly, they don't own, so there's that lack of a vested interest in the place.
Well, I think it's the 80-20 rule. It's the 80% of people are making 20% of the problems, or the way it's supposed to go. I don't necessarily think it's only the newbies. Well, it's only the newbies that are making the problems. I think the older people have been there for a very long time, have a community, and there is a group of connection with the people in the city or in the centre. Yeah,
I think I agree with you. There is a group of people. We created a WhatsApp group, which is for the whole of Central, which is always a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
But we needed a way to communicate with everyone. So on there we get that sense of community, and it's slowly starting to build, because we've got people from all over the world living in Central, different ages, different races, different religions. So finding a common ground, we had to find a place where everyone can go, this is my Central, whether you from a different country, from a different race, or whatever. So we're slowly building that. We're slowly starting to build that. Your question about the body corporates and so on is, there's a lot of investment property in Central where the owners aren't necessarily in Central, and we're dealing with tenants, which shouldn't be a problem. It should just be managed in a way that that the tenants still feel like it's my Central, even though I don't own the property. It's my suburb. It's the park in which my kids should play. I actually can complain about the fact that the lawn's not getting mowed enough, if that's your opinion, or the security's not up to standard. But yeah, and we're slowly building on that, and we're seeing more and more of that involvement, if that makes sense.
Lauren, you running a business there, obviously logistically it works. Who are your customers, and what's the dynamic on a day-to-day basis?
My customers are mainly the people in the building, which ranges from judges and acting judges and advocates to a call centre person. So we're for everybody. Less so people who live in Central. I wouldn't say I'm their first choice for a coffee. I just don't think it's the culture's in there for the person who lives in the flats next door to me. But they're also working people who leave before I open maybe and only get back after I've closed. So the dynamic is huge, with quite a few international people recently. I think finding it online, my great reviews.
Of course.
And good food.
Yeah, of course, all of this. But it's definitely evolving and changing, but it's mainly the people in the building and the working people in the area.
Yeah, okay. But like you said, you found there is, despite what we probably there is a self-policing aspect to it. There's a strong community, and you've witnessed that, haven't you? You've seen people looking after their turf there.
I have. I mean, I think about the kids in the street around my shop. They play soccer together, and they're very protective over each other. And when they see cars, they won't let them go. But I mean, they play together, and it's really cool. Yeah. And the moms come out, and someone watches them, and you hear a few clicks every now and then, and some angry words. But I mean, it's beautiful to witness. And when there's been incidents, I've seen people in the street, in Ring Street, the shop owners or people that are walking down the streets, finding these people and bringing them to justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
with the security company, of course.
Of course.
You know, but I've definitely seen that more than once, but I think maybe it's the flats that are near to me that I witnessed this. Probably less students there.
Yeah, but even the students, even to get to that, I mean, we've had some projects where the students, we had some projects with Sustainable Seas Trust,
Yeah.
and the students really got involved. Like the students really try and, I mean, fortunately we were all that age, so you can almost freely discriminate against a student. They do certain things, but
Those court days.
yes, yeah. But they really want to be part of their community.
Yeah.
We see the students, but you need to create a platform.
Yes.
They are only there for a short time,
Yeah.
and you need to create a place where they can fit in quickly and make a change.
I know what the norm is.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is the norm.
This is
Yeah.
how it's done. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is where you can add some value, and then we actually see the students also getting involved, like the parents with the kids that's been staying there for a long time. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, the students can, and many of them do play an active role in bettering the area.
Yeah.
You mentioned security, and that for me is fundamental. I mean, we're encouraging people to re-engage with the area. We know about its beauty, we know about its historic value, but fundamentally, if it isn't safe, that's something that we should have the greatest concern with. But I know there's been these incredible initiatives. A lot of people watching probably don't know about it, in terms of CCTV cameras, in terms of improved street lighting, citywide security. They work with you closely at the SRA. We met with Stephen, who heads that up, and he said it's almost like a military operation. I mean, there is organised crime in that area, of course, drugs, prostitution, that kind of thing. And he said that the challenge is almost going from zone to try and clear this issue up, this problem. But it's the wider issues, of course, the underlying social problems. What happens if you do push that problem somewhere else? I mean, is there any contingency plan for that?
You're asking us some difficult questions here, Dean.
Yeah, sure, I appreciate it, but people want to...
100%. So,
You're up, buddy.
yeah, thanks. I'll start with your question, what are the security measures? I'll start with that because that's an easier one to answer. We put facial recognition cameras and number plate recognition cameras up into all the entry points into Central. So the vehicle drives in and it's been stolen and flagged by the police, we pick it up. If your vehicle's been stolen in Central and it's flagged by the police, we can see if it's left the area or if it's still in the area. Initially that was quite successful in recovering stolen vehicles. Obviously people realise that they learn about that, and that's fine. We just don't want the crime to happen in Central. That's the SRA's function. And we've now effectively branched that out into using it for many other things. We can see whether contractors are actually cleaning where they should, whether parks are being lawn mowed when they should. We've got all of that footage. We handing it over to the town rangers. We've got a weekly meeting with them about illegal dumping. So we pick up vehicles, we see shops dumping their stuff. So that's really made quite a bit of change, and we've got 2 citywide vehicles in Central all the time. So if someone needs assistance, they're really quick, they're there all the time. Your next question about what happens when you push at the vagrant issue and so on, that's a difficult question for us. It's something we deal with a lot. It comes up in our board meetings a lot. We don't necessarily have the answers as to how to deal with the vagrants. What we see is a spike in vagrants in other areas of the city, St George's Park, for argument's sake, Richmond Hill, North End. So we've almost accepted that that's an issue, a broader socioeconomic issue, that us as the SRA, we're more than happy to partake in a solution, but we can't facilitate that solution on our own at the moment. So unfortunately, that's almost like just pushing the problem away, which doesn't sit well with us. But for the time being, that's if we want kids to play in the park, because we've got beautiful parks. If we want people to go and be able to have a picnic at sunset at the fort,
We have to make it safe for them.
We need to make it safe, and that's the two things. We are struggling with those two things. So we don't actually have a solution. It's quite difficult.
No, it's a massive responsibility. Of course, you're dealing with people's lives, people who are in a desperate position anyway to be in that kind of situation. But for me, it's fascinating. You mentioned about the international aspect. I visited the beautiful Catholic cathedral there, and the father there said to me, he said we had over nearly 40 nationalities in our congregation this Sunday. Incredible mix of cultures, that people are in that centre. They are obviously mixing. They are, engaging in good and bad activities as well. I want to talk now about probably the elephant in the room, which is the role of the landlords in Central. A lot of people watching will probably have been listening to my Frontierland podcast that I do on Algoa FM. And I interviewed a man called Ken Denton recently. And Ken, as you know, is in the history of Port Elizabeth. Like he's the biggest property owner in the history of Port Elizabeth in terms of all the different buildings he owns. Very misunderstood character. I'd heard about him when I arrived in town. I had the opportunity through my association with Adrian Gardner to meet Ken. I gained his trust, and he gave me half an hour of his time. And I do urge you to go and listen to that podcast. And it was fascinating. Interestingly enough, do you know that podcast had more listens than any other episode, because people want to have answers. Now, Ken is regarded as somebody who's come in, bought up the property, and perhaps has sat on those properties. We can see the decay of those buildings. There is wonderful development, of course. We can see what he has done in the Heritage Cafe area around that there's controversy perhaps with the style of the buildings, but you can see the care and the money that's been invested. But the argument, of course, it's not being done quick enough, and people want this to happen almost overnight. How do we engage with landlords like Ken Denton, and how can we perhaps open up conversations with people watching tonight and engage? Because there's a lot of animosity, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of anger. But this is our Central. It's there. We need to move forward and not look back. So, if you were going to get people together of different opinions, Lauren, how would you do it?
Well, I think with some of the problem is finding the landlords for these properties, and I'm sure this is something we know and we see. But everyone has a different opinion. There's bylaws, and they need to have things put in place to be able to demolish buildings or rebuild them, and these things don't always get cleared quick enough.
Yeah.
So, it's a problem. We don't want businesses to leave Central.
Yeah.
I think that's number one. But also, you can't just let a building rot away. It's not okay. It's not safe for people, and it's also it's not okay.
Yeah.
Historically, and also besides it being eyesore. And that's something that our secretary is working on, and trying to find the people and get people to have the same kind of opinion and see what we can do to go forward. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's lots of people with different opinions.
Yeah. One of the things that Ken made very clear in my interview was the challenges he has with local authority, with planning permission for the things he wants to do. There's a lot of red tape there. Is that something you can perhaps help with? Are you a liaison body between the private and the public sector?
Dean, you are asking the difficult questions. We've got a monthly meeting. About 3 years ago, myself and David Edwards, our fearless leader, went to see the city manager at the time, and he got quite a few of their role players in. The head of the electricity department, roads and stormwater, planning, etc. Said to them, all we need is timelines and answers. And he was quite blunt. He said to them, are they asking too much? Is this too much what they're asking? And they said, no, that's not too much. And he said, cool, can we have a monthly meeting with you? And the city managers have changed over time, so we still have a monthly meeting. They don't happen every month, and sometimes they're relatively poorly attended from the municipality side. For the SRA, we feel that's, I don't want to say too difficult a task for now, but we've got more urgent issues, the waste on the street, the lawn not being cut, and so on. It's something we've attempted, we've written to the municipality and so on. And then to get to your earlier question about the landlords and what their role is, I think one of the difficult things in Central is that economics plays a big role. So it's quite simple. Is it financially worth it to fix that building up? If it was, someone like Ken Denton would fix the building up. He's fixed up many other buildings in other areas of Port Elizabeth and redeveloped them. So I couldn't imagine someone wouldn't if it wasn't economically viable. And it leaves us with a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. So if you fix one building up in a street, it's not going to, you fix it up to a certain standard, the person whom you fixed it up for wouldn't necessarily want to come and rent that building and stay there with neighbours that are not complying with municipal bylaws, etc. So you have to fix up a critical mass at once, in my opinion at least, and no one seems to be prepared to make that move. That's what it looks like to me from where I'm standing. It looks like fixing one building up isn't economically viable. We need multiple parties to do that at the same time.
And that's the challenge, of course. How much is this directed by the political landscape of our city? We know that the current mayor has his challenges. He's ahead of a big coalition. Are things put on hold as our sort of political landscape works itself out as well?
Some of the basic things, like I mentioned mowing of the lawns earlier, every time there's some political change, the contract is stopped, or a contract is stopped, or the people from Public Works that should be assisting us. There's always some sort of issue. It stops and then it starts again, but you lose quite a bit of momentum with that. So that's like the low level stuff that makes a big difference. If you drive past and everything's neatly kept, it's easier to invest in an area. I do share Ken's frustrations on the municipality's ability to rezone properties, pass site development plans. One of the issues in Central is that the municipal bylaws require you a certain amount of parking per 100 square meters to do certain things, but the buildings that were built there were never designed to have so many parking. So it's physically impossible to do it. It's a bit of a stalemate. So because of the change in political scenario, barring the current coalition, it seems that no one's in control for long enough to go, we acknowledge this problem, we'll start sorting it out, and then we'll sort it out completely. It like starts, then it stops, and the process starts again, which is quite frustrating.
I'd like to encourage everybody watching, certainly if you're invested in this city, to ask the guys questions and make your comments. I can see them coming up on the side here, and we're going to flag up a few as we go along. But I want to actually, on my travels around Eastern Cape, guys, I want to just remind us of some success stories. I know it's a slightly different setting in a different context, but you've got connections in Bedford, I believe, Jurie. And there's a place that I visited that was down on its luck 20 years ago. And through education, through investment, through people coming back to the place, believing in again, you go to Bedford now and it's a smashing little town and community. So not everything goes one way in South Africa. I can see it with my own eyes. As people are invested in this city and space becomes a bit tighter, we're going to have to look at that space again and maybe reclaim it and use it, maybe for different reasons. Remember, it was the English that came here and set up their infrastructure. As you said, the lack of parking, the buildings are tight. It's very narrow down there in certain places. But there is that heritage aspect to it, and we've tried with tourism as well. I mean, how much of that aspect could we encourage people to come back? Because we've got our beautiful beaches, we've got our ocean, etc. We've got our wildlife, but I believe also we've got so much potential in this city, haven't we?
We do.
Yeah, I think that like that historic tour of Tony Neverland is
The next one's on the 18th.
I think
March.
Yeah, there's one coming up
Yeah.
coming up soon. We chatted about that earlier. We actually, I feel like I need to tell the story. I went there with on this tour with some of our block marshals, and he was explaining the history of the city, and one of the guys actually got very emotional when he took the tour into St Mary's Cathedral. You know, he said he's been working in Central for the SRA for, I think, 3 years. He didn't know such a beautiful place existed. That's someone working on the streets of Central, got emotional by the sheer beauty of one of the buildings in Central. So the architecture is amazing, the history it's worth preserving, and it's worth exposing to the world. It's worth it for people to come and see those things if we package it in a way that it's digestible for them, you know.
But like everything, it's a changing landscape. As a historian, I'm kind of torn between the authenticity of the buildings, keeping them in the original state. But I'm also a pragmatist. Surely it's better for that building to be used, even though it's been restored in a slightly different way. Would that be your view as well?
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, history is important, but it needs to be usable and marketable.
Yeah.
And, you know, to have a beautiful street lined with little restaurants and cafes, it needs to be something that people can actually go to and visit, and there be at least some parking. But we need to look at it as a whole, holistically, and not really as it is right now, get angry about one or two.
Yeah, and again, it brings in that other debate. The more cooks in the kitchen, it stops the actual thing being, the cake being baked, doesn't it? I will encourage everybody to do what the guy said and to get in touch with the SRA and take advantage of their. Is it a monthly tour they do? Is it a fortnightly?
It's at the moment, I think it's monthly.
Monthly
Yeah.
tour.
But you can book it.
Yeah.
I know of some corporates that have booked it. You can get in contact with Hayley at our office, and she will, or Tony directly, and he'll take people on tours. I've never seen someone so passionate about Central as and knowledgeable. He really knows incredible amount of stuff about Central.
There's Hayley now encouraging people to email us at info@central.sra.co.za to find out about those heritage walks. And I mean, Hayley was very keen for me, and they're free. I mean, who doesn't love free? It was a wonderful, wonderful Saturday morning I spent. I think we were out for 3 or 4 hours. Tony is so passionate. There are buildings there that would rival anything I've seen in central London. In the cathedrals, obviously, we know about our town hall and our library. A lot of them we can't get access into, unfortunately, but to understand the context and to understand and to be able to walk the city centre, which a lot of people are not comfortable doing. One of the first things I did when I came here was I went up the Campanile Tower. And the view is incredible from there. But the thing that struck me, the Campanile Tower and the infrastructure around it is A1 in terms of tourist standard, but it's not in the safest of areas. You're right next to the old railway station, and of course, where do you park your car? So for me, I've got this, as the unofficial ambassador of Nelson Mandela Bay, I've got this kind of dilemma. Do I encourage people to go and experience that if they're potentially not going to come back, perhaps to the car being there or whatever? I mean, that's pretty drastic. So we need to get the infrastructure right, don't we, before we can...
But I think in any city centre you need to be aware of not leaving things in your back seat. And that's anywhere in the city. I mean, it's not a case of you're definitely going to get mugged if you go to Central. You need to be aware and look around you and not walk around with your things exposed.
Yeah, I agree. I'm playing devil's advocate here. It was not at any stage that I feel unsafe. In fact, people going about their business. There were tourists. We had the buses going up through the centre from the cruise ships.
There's been lots of cruise ships, guys, trotting around recently.
Yeah. And that's something that needs to be reported. We only hear the bad news, don't we?
Yeah.
But they must look at this place and think, heck, this is Port Elizabeth. We didn't even know this existed. And I must admit, I didn't know that the actual heritage of that whole, the Donkin Reserve, the fort, the central city area. I mean, it's absolutely magnificent. So I think tourism is the key. In 2010, I believe, there was a lot of money spent on the infrastructure when the World Cup was here, wasn't there?
Yeah.
What happened after that?
Warren, you want to go? I think a lot of money was spent on tourism. Obviously, I'm assuming the authorities at the time had to deal with one large event.
And they also had budget.
That lots of budget to cater for the World Cup. What happened after that is Central was left with some nice infrastructure, but still the economics didn't completely make sense. It wasn't enough to change the face of Central, to encourage other restaurants I mean, Lauren's restaurant is an amazing restaurant, very nice food, and so on. But there's not enough of that. So I think the idea was that it should have been a catalyst, and it was, but it wasn't enough for the vast. There's a lot of people that live in Central, so fixing up one or two streets almost seemed like a very good idea, and I think it was a noble and good idea, but it wasn't quite enough to carry the momentum through.
Can we bring up some of the comments, Gary? Because I know a lot of people are commending the work of the SRA, which is fantastic. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that people do know what you're doing. Mariana Martin, do you know Mariana?
Yeah, she had a lovely restaurant in Parliament Street, yeah.
It was, it was
yes.
beautiful and horrific at the same time.
I went there many times. They had the great, those pastas, they were the bomb. At my student days, when we drank those courts. But no, it's not a laughing matter. It's unfortunate what happened to Parliament Street, and that is one of the things that we really need to try hard to not let people leave, because that's when people think we've given up now, and then it gets overtaken by what we're trying to not achieve.
I mean, the role Haley's pointed out here, the role of the block marshals. What do they actually do? Are they designated to a certain area?
They march around Central. You'll find them all over the show. They have little bibs, and they'll tell you where not to put your rubbish and which days not to do it. Okay. And in general, they give advice to tourists and,
Are they volunteers?
No, they're employed by the SRA.
Okay.
So I've got, in our weekly waste and strategic meeting, they come to those meetings as well. They bring a lot of information because they see things. They'll say to us, that building's been changed into student accommodation, for argument's sake. We need to go speak to those people so we can organise them. Or they'll say, we suspect there might be some illegal activity in that building because we see this and this is happening. We also, part of them is a greening team. They've got a little tuk-tuk. They drive around and they supplement the municipality's cleaning teams. We clean some, and our block marshals will assist with that. They'll clean some, even private properties. If there's some dumping, we'll clean that up. And they'll assist wherever we need someone to go and physically help with any issues that we have. But they also really understand Central, so they bring valuable information back to us. Because often, like Laura and myself, we're stuck in our day-to-day businesses. You need to understand what's happening on the street. So they are eyes and ears and hands, for the lack of a better word, and they're quite smart guys. They bring valuable information back to us, and we can act on that.
I wonder how many people watching are aware of that. That's actually happening now. So we're being proactive in this, aren't we? I mean, it's not just a one-way story. I mean, this is something that's happening on a daily basis. Here we go, accrediting accommodation for students in Central by the university and estate agents aren't collaborating. Is that something that you think is a problem? Central is essentially a residential tourism area and students are transient. So again, it's this student issue. It seems to come up again and again, doesn't it? But historically, students lived in Central, didn't they?
Yes, I don't think it's fair to just blame the students. I think the university has a role to play. You go to other student towns in South Africa, and they function completely well. As a matter of fact, they attract tourists because there are student towns. So I think the landlords, the one discussion I had with someone from the university this week is that they should add waste management to the accreditation of a student dig. So you've got 20 or 30 students moving into a building in January, everyone's new, no one knows what to do with their waste or where to put it out. They put it out on the street. Understandably, the neighbours get frustrated. They're like, look at what these students are doing, but there's no one to tell them what to do. So it's not only the students, and I think looking at the buildings that's been fixed up, the students have brought some economic life back into Central, in terms of buildings being fixed up, buildings that were vacant that are now occupied, people that are now supporting shops, supporting printing shops, etc. So it might be that it's not managed correctly, but that's not necessarily the fault the out of town student that's moved here in January and doesn't actually know any better. So I think students are part of the problem, but the solution must come from somewhere else, the university, landlords, etc. And my experience has been once the students are informed, they do change their behaviour. They also want to live in a clean place or a safe place and a happy place, and so on.
It's interesting, as a university lecturer that's worked all around the world, including Australia and the UK, the students are so looked after, but here almost they're left to get on with their own devices. I mean, you come into a strange town, you go into an urban area, a lot of them are from outlying regions as well. And so the university has got a bit more of a responsibility to play here, we think.
I think so. I do think they should. I think there's a bigger role for them to play, and I think it's small changes that they can make. I don't think it's necessarily changes that are out of their reach. I think it's really in their reach, and it's small things that we can tweak in order to get them.
It's an education, really.
Yeah,
I mean, when I left school, I didn't know how to take the rubbish out on certain days. Buying toothpaste was a big thing. So, like, I think give these kids a break. You know?
Exactly. Like, we were all students at some point. I don't think it's the students, and I think it's a problem we can solve relatively easily, and it's not an expensive problem to solve.
Yeah.
Well, ever since I've been here, I mean, it's symptomatic of a town situation. Everybody sort of blames other groups, and for me, the key is to get people together talking. We've all got a vested interest in it. I don't know anybody who wants it to be derelict or whatever. Perhaps Annette is pointing out here that there is obviously theft issues of infrastructure. Substance abuse is a key thing, though, isn't it? I mean, obviously, a drug problem, as you rightly said, it's endemic around the world. It's not even linked to poor economic areas, but it's the central area is identified as a place where people can go and obtain drugs, and that obviously feeds other kind of activities in that area. I mean, is there any kind of systematic work leading to controlling that?
It's something.
Yeah.
I mean, people are going to find a place to sell and buy drugs, and that's not something we definitely don't condone. But we try to get these people out of the town or out of the city or out of central, and they do find their way back again. Making that kind of change is a big change, but you know, these are all on our hit list, and we want to achieve all these things. But you know, slowly but surely.
Yeah. I was talking to Stephen, and I think the thing that really struck home to me is he said some of the sites.
Expert on that.
He's the security guy, but he said some of the sites. I mean, he's quite a hardened ex-military man. He said some of the sites and some of those buildings how people live are mind blowing. He said that the dens and the kind of rat runs down below these buildings. Prostitution, of course, is a big issue, and he went up to one of these unfortunate ladies and said, "Who comes here?" And she said, "Sir, people like you." So it shows this is being fed. People are coming into this area to obviously deal in the drugs and whatever. So it's just recognised as that area. It's getting that. It's claiming that area back. The problem is, of course, is where does that issue go? Because we're not getting rid of it.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it earlier that it's almost a boiling pot of all South Africa's social, economic issues. That they're all there. Getting back to Stephen and the security, I think this is a good platform to mention in terms of, because the drugs and prostitution is a supply and demand thing. If people buy those products, and our cameras entering and exiting Central has yielded some good results in terms of you can see the police can see a vehicle whose address is not within Central coming in, let's say 3 o'clock on a Friday morning, that they flag that they could, there's an issue. Why is that vehicle there and leaving again? So I think it's important that the public knows that there are a lot of CCTV cameras that have gone up, that they are being monitored. We now have someone dedicated only to the Central cameras. So So yeah, we are watching.
Yeah, we are watching you.
It's not a safe place to do your stuff.
I mean, David makes a point about vagrants, of course, and funny enough, I played tennis at St George's Club, one of the oldest tennis clubs in the whole country. St George's Park, that area, I've just received notification. There is a clean-up coming as we speak, David. People are doing something. So hopefully we're going to turn the corner, because it's an iconic part of our city, of course. But those park areas are a big problem. We tend to think it as a very built-up area, but you have open areas where people, of course, are sleeping. They're living rough, aren't they?
Yeah, if you look at, I agree with you on the parks, but the opportunity of the parks are actually very big. If you were, for argument's sake, a property developer, and you had to draw up a plan for an area the size of Central, St George's, etc., you would include parks that size. I think if they are managed better and looked after, it can be a place. It's actually a gem. It's turned into something else. It's turned into a place where vagrants can live undisturbed and so on. But they are very valuable assets other than the buildings, which I'm hoping the SRA can play a role in. I don't want to use the word reclaiming them, but making them safe and a happy place where people can go after work, where their kids play sport and go home again and not feel threatened in any way or form. So yeah, they are challenging, but they're definitely worth looking after and worth developing, because they've got enormous potential, in my opinion.
And for some people, this is the only grass they have. They live in a flat. They don't have a place to go lie on the grass or get your feet in there. So I think it's important, and I would want my child and my children to run around in that kind of area.
Totally.
So the more it gets used, I think the less the vagrants are going to feel comfortable. So it's also a chicken and egg situation, and this is something that you are working hard to solve.
Trying our best.
Yes.
You'll certainly
Keep that grass cut.
I tell you what, we're going to certainly get more people in at your restaurant tomorrow for lunch, and I promise you, the lunches are fantastic. Some of the best prices as well. It's worth going into Central just to have lunch at Lauren's 78 Havelock.
Tell great jokes.
Oh yeah, of course. The host is what we go there for. That's definitely, that's for sure. But no, people you can see they're very supportive of what you're doing. I think let's look to the future. For me, we've got hope. What else have we got? We've not got hope. One of the things I say often at my talks, the grass isn't necessarily greener. Here in South Africa, we feel we've got the world's problems, and to be quite honest, other places have got problems. I've lived in Australia, the UK, America. They have their own problems. Let me tell you that. Here, you can see it. It's very visual. It's obviously the economic disparity, but there's something about Port Elizabeth and its people, and I think you said earlier, the city is the people.
Yeah.
And the people that are so passionate about this city inspire me, because my advantage, of course, I didn't see this city when it was in its prime. It was functioning, everything was clean and neat. But I just see the potential in it. So the guys like yourself who are still here, still believe in it, I just have the utmost admiration. So I can understand when I put up my pictures on Facebook and I say, well, this wonderful old building, and then people will say, well, it was better in the olden days. Well, everything was better in the olden days. We are here in 2023 with some major, major problems in this country and challenges. But we've still got people like yourselves who believe in this country and believe in this city. And that's the main thing. One of the things we talked about earlier, and do you think this will turn, if we can encourage ownership of residential areas, for example, within Central, because then people would care more, wouldn't they? And is that something we can actually
build in the community more, I think.
Yeah.
There needs to be more interaction with the community and understanding who your neighbours are in general.
I think there's the actual ownership of property, but then there's what you're referring to, the ownership of my own space.
Yeah.
Like, please don't put the rubbish there. Sorry guys, no one's mowed the lawn. So guys, do you mind if we go and plant some herbs in the public open space? From that level, and if I look at our SRA, is a bit like many community projects, except that we actually have funds to spend. We don't have lots of funds to spend, and we need to spend them in line with what the ratepayers require. But even there, ownership, we've got a project where we putting lights onto buildings. We've got limited time. The board on the SRA are all volunteers. No one gets paid for their time. So it would be nice to see, and often you get the idea that people go, if I could make a change, I would join, but I don't think I can't, I think I'm going to waste my time. The thing with the SRA is that it's detached from any government organisation, functional or dysfunctional. So it's really a very nice platform. So for someone that says, I want to make a change, but I don't know where to go. We really believe in it. That's why we invest our time in it. We also think it's a cause worth investing our time into. And we are making a change. It might be slow. I think just the slow down of the decay, instead of massive moves forward, that is a change in its own. The pace of decay has definitely stopped.
Yeah.
We've definitely had some improvements, some wins. We're working on some other projects that are well within our reach. So it's time spent, and I believe we will see the change from that time spent. I don't think it's a waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, someone makes a point here. Hannah, she talks about Greenpoint, obviously in Cape Town here. I mean, Cape Town's a slightly different model because of the politics and the investment there. But we were talking earlier, look at areas of Cape Town like Woodstock, Sea Point, when I first came to South Africa, was a no-go zone. Now look at how that has changed. With the kind of things we've got here in terms of tourism, we need to encourage people back here, and that's one of my passions, of course, with the wildlife tourism and things like that. If we can get people back here spending money, I think we can turn this around. But what Hayley's making the point here, if we can just bring up there, Gary, I'd like to know how people can get involved, and this is something that I think is important about tonight. I mean, it's all very well us flying the flag and saying, but how can people get involved? There's a meeting coming up on the 15th of March. Make an appeal now to people. You've said that you've turned up to so many meetings that where a difference could have been made, but there hasn't been enough people there to even have a vote.
Yeah. So I think how the difference, I've been to body corporate meetings where there is the money to paint a building, but you need a quorum to vote, and there's only one or two people. So your question of how people can get involved and make a change, we've got the community meetings. Our SRA board, I think, is a very open space. It's a Zoom meeting. We encourage people to come to those meetings and see if there's something which they want to do. The one thing that I'm quite adamant about is often these civic organizations becomes like a lifelong commitment. I also want to encourage the public to go, I would like to take on the lighting of the buildings. We actually have the money to do that. We just need someone to drive it. We are doing it to the best of our abilities, but there's space for someone to go, give me 12 months, I'll sort out the lighting. There's a possibility of getting funds for other stuff, for parks, etc. So it's a dynamic space. So other than the community meetings, I'd really encourage people that want to invest a set amount of time. Go, I just want to do this project, then I'm done. Guys, thank you very much. I'm moving on. It will be very well received, and we've got our accountant or our finance guy might not be too happy with me saying that we do not have unlimited funds, but we've got funds that we can allocate to certain things. We can make appeals to big business. We've worked with the chambers, we work with the MBDA. We have the ear of people. If we give them a sustainable business plan, they might give us the money. So it's not that hard to actually make changes that will then start that snowball of, and it will organically go. We just need to light the fire, if that makes sense.
Oh, well, I hope as a result of tonight that people will come forward, because if there is the money and there is the space in which to make a difference, we're seeing it increasingly. You talk about the business chamber, they're working with the private sector to change some real big infrastructure problems within the city. Yeah. So that's where the private sector can actually step in, can't they?
Yeah.
In terms
somebody just mentioned now, like, Central needs more space for children to play outside, and that's something that we definitely really want to work on as a netball team or a soccer, soccer team, that the guys can really come together in a safe place, and there's people that are training them and giving them some advice, and you can really grow the next little star from there. But we need the commitment from the community. We also need, the people need some funding for different kinds of things, clothing or the actual space for them to do it. But I really think we have the people in Central to do something like that.
Yeah.
And a sport brings people together. Netball for the girls and for the boys, we can basketball, some kind of soccer, the Spanish mini ball thing. But that is what we need. And I think that if there's people out there that think that they can bring something to the table with that, really, we'd like that help.
and get in touch with the SRA. We can, this is the hub. So if you've ever wondered what you can do to help this city, and certainly the heart of its city, which is Central, the SRA is the place to go, and the details are here. Please do everything you can, because for me, the health of Central really does mirror the health of this bay, the health of Quebec, Port Elizabeth. Yes, we live in the outskirts perhaps now, but we look at that centre as the heart of our town, and if it's not right, there's something that doesn't sit well with us, isn't it?
Yeah.
I visited for the first time recently the Feather Market, for example. To get inside some of these buildings, I just encourage you to do it if you can, and you get that opportunity. And I do believe it isn't wrong. Mr. Denton said he has plans for the library and obviously some of the buildings that he's got there. Time is of the essence, of course. People are running out of patience. They've seen this development sort of stop and start. Perhaps we're not aware of some of the challenges that people at that level have in terms of their planning, dealings with the municipality, but I do believe that as long as the infrastructure of the actual buildings is safe and sound, we've still got hope for those buildings. And I as historically accurate as I'd like to be, I do believe that a building that's being used is far better than one that's not being used and mothballed like they are at the moment, and that's the thing. So I encourage everybody watching to come to Lauren's restaurant, which is 78 Havelock, and support the businesses that are in Central. Somebody, just to wrap up now, somebody asked about Stanley Street. Is it a place we can still visit at night? I mean, where would you go of an evening in Central? Where would be the places that...
Stanley's in Richmond Hill, so not as Central as we'll say.
Okay.
It's not part of our...
Wasn't my fault.
Don't
shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger.
I mean, when the cricket was happening in the Bay, there was lots of people milling around Central, walking around, and I think it was so cool to see. And besides the support we got in Central, I think it was great. When it comes to, I own a restaurant in Central and I don't open at night time because, you need to know your area and just also be aware. And I think that's... I own a business in the area and I don't open at night, so that is sad and should say enough.
Yeah, but I've also been to events at night, and events certainly places come alive.
We have different security and make sure we look after ourselves and look after our people. Going to go watch a show at the Opera House, it's something I did as a child and it's a beautiful memory, and I'd love to be able, my child to be able to do the same thing. And so I think we need to look after the area, we need to care, and we need to make a difference. Yeah,
and this is, it's not just any opera house. I think it's one of the oldest opera houses in Africa, isn't it?
Yeah.
The history of this town, it really does, and it was born in that central area, it was born in that valley, and I think as long as we have people like yourselves doing what you do, and I hope from tonight, whether you're watching it live, ladies and gentlemen, or you're watching later, and we'll share this, you do reach out to the SRA, you do reach out to these people and do what you can to help, because I believe that we can all moan, we can all sit behind our keyboards and say it was better in the olden days, but we're here in 2023 and we've got to get on with things.
It's true.
Leave us with an inspirational thought.
Oh, wow.
Come on, inspire us.
Eat your beets.
Eat your beets. There we are. That's from a restaurateur.
Healthy restaurateur.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Everybody.
Thank you.